The lightning split the night sky like God's own fury. And Vincent Irving knew the storm was going to be a killer, even before he heard the first screams of his horses in the barn. He'd been ranching in the Utah Territory long enough to recognize when nature meant business, and tonight she was dealing death. He pulled his coat tighter as he stepped out into the deluge, rain hammering against his face with the force of stones, and that's when he saw the wagon. It was tilted at a dangerous angle about 50 yards from his property line, one wheel clearly broken, the canvas top flapping wildly in the wind like a wounded bird trying to escape. Vincent squinted through the downpour and saw movement, someone struggling with the horses that were wild with panic. Without thinking, he ran toward the wreckage, his boots sinking into mud that seemed determined to pull him down to hell itself. As he got closer, he could see it was a woman, and she was fighting a losing battle with a bay mare that was rearing up, eyes rolled back in terror. "Let her go," Vincent shouted over the roar of thunder. "She'll break your arm." The woman turned toward him, and even through the sheets of rain, he could see the fear and exhaustion written across her face. She was soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks, and there was something in her eyes that told him she'd already been through hell before the storm ever started. She released the horse's lead, and the animal immediately bolted into the darkness. "My wagon," she started, but Vincent was already at her side, grabbing her arm. "Forget the wagon. We need to get to shelter before we're both struck by lightning." She resisted for a moment, looking back at the tilted wagon with something like desperation, but another crack of thunder made the decision for her. Vincent half dragged, half carried her across the muddy expanse toward his ranch house, which sat sturdy and solid against the raging storm. They stumbled up the porch steps together, and he kicked open the door, both of them practically falling inside. The sudden quiet was disorienting. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but within the thick log walls of the house, it was reduced to a distant rumble. Vincent quickly shut the door and turned to look at the woman properly for the first time. She was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue, and she wrapped her arms around herself in a futile attempt to generate warmth. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes," Vincent said, already moving toward the bedroom. He returned with a thick wool blanket and one of his shirts. "There's a screen in the corner. Change into this and wrap yourself in the blanket. I'll get the fire going stronger." She hesitated, looking at him with wide eyes that he now saw were a startling shade of green, like spring grass after rain. There was wariness there, the kind that came from hard experience, but also a practical understanding of the situation. She took the clothes with trembling hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. Vincent busied himself with the fire, feeding it logs until it roared with heat, carefully keeping his back turned to give her privacy. He heard the rustle of wet fabric being removed, the soft sounds of her moving behind the screen. His own clothes were soaked through as well, but that could wait. First, he needed to make sure this stranger didn't freeze to death in his home. "I'm decent," she said after a few minutes. He turned to find her wrapped in the blanket, his shirt hanging loose on her frame. She was smaller than he'd first thought, maybe 5.5 feet tall, and she couldn't have weighed more than 120 pounds. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes around her shoulders, and she was still shivering despite the blanket. "Sit by the fire," Vincent instructed, pulling a chair closer to the hearth. "I'll make some coffee." She obeyed without argument, sinking into the chair with visible relief. Vincent moved to the kitchen area, stoking the stove and setting a pot of coffee to boil. He found some bread and cold meat in the larder and brought it all to the table near the fire. "When did you last eat?" he asked. The woman looked at the food with undisguised hunger. "Yesterday morning." "Then eat. We can talk after." She fell on the food with the desperation of someone who'd been running on empty for too long. Vincent watched her for a moment, then went to change his own clothes. When he returned, she'd finished eating and was holding her hands out to the fire, color slowly returning to her cheeks. "My name is Olivia Harrison," she said without looking at him. "I was heading to Salt Lake City when the wheel broke. I tried to fix it, but the storm came too fast." "Vincent Irving," he replied, settling into the chair opposite her. "You were traveling alone." Something flickered across her face, pain and something else he couldn't quite read. "Yes, alone. That's dangerous, especially this time of year. It's September 1875, Miss Harrison. The weather in Utah Territory can turn on a dime. Mrs. Harrison," she corrected quietly, and he noticed for the first time the thin gold band on her left hand. "And I didn't have much choice in the matter." Vincent poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. She wrapped both hands around it, absorbing the warmth. The storm continued to rage outside, rattling the windows and howling around the eaves. He settled back in his chair and waited. People talked when they were ready, and this woman clearly had a story to tell. After a long silence, Olivia spoke. "My husband died 3 months ago. Cholera. We had a small farm outside of Denver, but without him, I couldn't manage it. His brother offered to buy the land, said he'd give me a fair price." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He gave me enough for a wagon and supplies and told me I had a week to clear out." Vincent felt anger stir in his chest. He'd seen this before, widows and orphans pushed out by men who saw opportunity in tragedy. "I'm sorry. I have a cousin in Salt Lake City," Olivia continued. "She and her husband run a boarding house. She wrote and said I could work there, help manage the place. It seemed like the best option." She looked down at her coffee. "But I'm beginning to think there are no good options, only less terrible ones." "How far were you from Salt Lake City?" "I don't know. I lost my bearings in the storm." "Could be 20 miles, could be 50. Vincent stood and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. The storm showed no signs of letting up. "You can stay here tonight. In the morning, I'll help you assess the damage to your wagon and see what can be salvaged." Olivia looked up at him, and for the first time he saw something other than fear and exhaustion in her eyes. It was gratitude, pure and simple. "You're very kind, Mr. Irving." "Vincent," he corrected. "And it's just basic decency. No one should be left out in a storm like this." He gave her his bed, insisting despite her protests, and made himself comfortable in the chair by the fire with a spare blanket. But sleep didn't come easily. He found himself listening to the storm and thinking about the woman in the next room, Olivia. Even soaked and exhausted, there was something striking about her, a quiet strength that spoke of resilience. He wondered what she'd been like before grief and hardship had worn her down. Vincent had been alone on this ranch for 5 years, ever since he'd saved enough from his days as a cowboy to buy the land and build the house. He'd always told himself he preferred solitude, that he didn't need anyone else. But lying there in the firelight, listening to the storm, he felt the weight of that solitude more keenly than he had in a long time. When morning finally came, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and dripping. Vincent woke to find Olivia already up, standing at the window in his shirt and the blanket wrapped around her like a shawl, looking out at the devastated landscape. Her wet clothes from the night before were draped over chairs near the fire, nearly dry. "Coffee," he offered, his voice rough with sleep. She turned and he saw she'd been crying. She wiped at her eyes quickly, trying to hide it. "Please." They drank their coffee in silence for a while, both avoiding the inevitable. Finally, Vincent set down his cup. "Let's go see the damage." The morning sun was bright and unforgiving as they walked across his property toward where the wagon still sat tilted and broken. The wheel wasn't just cracked, it was completely destroyed. Several spokes shattered beyond repair. The wagon itself had taken on water, and when Olivia climbed inside to check her belongings, Vincent heard her sharp intake of breath. "Everything's ruined," she said, her voice flat. "The water got into all the trunks. My clothes, the linens, everything." Vincent helped her down from the wagon and began pulling out what could be salvaged. There wasn't much. Some cooking supplies, a few tools, and at the bottom of one trunk, wrapped in oilcloth, a small bundle that had stayed dry. Olivia clutched it to her chest when she saw it. "What is it?" Vincent asked gently. "Letters from my mother. She died when I was 16, and a photograph of my wedding day." She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "It's all I have left of them." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with loss. Vincent felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of shared loneliness. He'd lost his own parents to fever when he was 23, and his only brother had headed east years ago. He understood what it meant to carry the weight of memory as your only connection to people who were gone. "We'll spread everything out to dry at the house," he said. "Some of it might be salvageable, and I've got a spare wheel in the barn that might fit your wagon. Won't know until we try." Olivia looked at him with disbelief. "Why are you helping me?" The question caught him off guard. "Why wouldn't I? Most men would have sent me on my way by now, or worse." The implication made Vincent's jaw tighten. "I'm not most men, and you needed help. That's reason enough." They worked together for the rest of the morning, spreading out sodden clothes and linens across every available surface at the house and in the barn. The sun was warm, and Vincent was optimistic that at least some of it could be saved. He measured the broken wheel against his spare and found it was close enough that with some adjustment, it would work. "I'll need a few days to make the repairs," he told Olivia as they took a break for lunch. "The axle took some damage too, and I'll need to reinforce it." "I don't have money to pay you," Olivia said quietly, staring at the sandwich he'd made her. "I didn't ask for payment." "Then I'll work for it. I can cook, clean, whatever you need. I won't take charity." Vincent saw the pride in the set of her shoulders, the determination in her eyes, and he respected it. "Fair enough. You can help with the cooking and the chickens. I've been managing on my own, but I won't lie, it'll be nice to have help." Something in Olivia's expression softened. "Thank you, Vincent." The way she said his name, soft and sincere, made something warm bloom in his chest. He looked away, focusing on his food. "We should check on your horses. They probably didn't run far." They found the bay mare and her companion, a sturdy paint gelding, grazing peacefully about a mile from the ranch. The storm had frightened them, but they were unharmed. Vincent helped Olivia lead them back and settled them in his barn with his own horses. The animals seemed grateful for shelter and food after their ordeal. As the afternoon wore on, Vincent found himself acutely aware of Olivia's presence. She moved through his house with quiet efficiency, tidying things he hadn't realized were messy, organizing his kitchen in ways that actually made sense. When evening came, she insisted on cooking dinner, and the smell of real food, properly prepared, filled the house in a way it hadn't since he'd been on his own. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Vincent asked as they sat down to a meal of fried chicken, biscuits, and greens. "My mother," Olivia said, a small smile touching her lips. "She said a woman should know how to make a home, no matter what circumstances she found herself in. I didn't understand what she meant when I was young, but I do now." "Tell me about her," Vincent said, surprising himself with the request. Olivia looked up from her plate, and for a moment he thought she might refuse. But then she began to talk, her voice soft but steady, about a woman who had come west with nothing but determination and had built a life through sheer force of will. She spoke of learning to read by candlelight, of helping her mother run a small dress shop in Denver, of dreams and plans that had seemed so certain before illness had stolen her mother away. Vincent found himself sharing in return, telling her about growing up on a small ranch in Colorado, about working cattle drives from the time he was 16, about the years of saving every penny until he could afford this land. They talked long into the night, the conversation flowing easily in a way that felt both strange and natural. When Olivia finally retired to the bedroom, Vincent settled once more in his chair by the fire. But this time, sleep came easier, and his dreams were filled with green eyes and soft laughter. The next few days fell into a pattern that felt almost domestic. Vincent worked on repairing the wagon while Olivia managed the house and helped with the animals. She proved to be a quick learner and wasn't afraid of hard work. He showed her how to check the fence lines, how to spot signs of predators near the chicken coop, how to read the weather in the way clouds gathered over the mountains. In return, she transformed his house from a bachelor's rough quarters into something that felt like a home. Curtains appeared in the windows, made from fabric she'd salvaged and mended from her ruined belongings. The smell of fresh bread filled the air most mornings. She even tackled his mending, which had been piling up for months. "You don't have to do all this," Vincent said one evening, watching her darn a sock by lamplight. "I want to," Olivia replied. "It feels good to be useful, to have purpose again." He understood that feeling. After his parents died, he'd thrown himself into work, needing the exhaustion to dull the edges of grief. "How long were you married?" Olivia's hands stilled for a moment before resuming their steady rhythm. 4 years. Robert was a good man, quiet, steady. He worked hard, never raised his voice or his hand to me. I thought we'd have a lifetime together, maybe children eventually." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "But God had other plans." "You believe that it was God's plan?" She looked up at him, really looked, and he saw the struggle in her eyes. "I don't know what I believe anymore. If it was God's plan for Robert to die, for me to lose everything, then I don't understand his purpose. But if it wasn't, if it's all just random chance and cruelty, that's even harder to accept." Vincent moved to sit across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "My mother used to say that we can't see the whole picture while we're living in it. That maybe understanding comes later, or maybe it doesn't come at all, and we just have to learn to live with the questions." "That's very wise." She was a wise woman, practical too. "She would have liked you." The words were out before Vincent could stop them, and they hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to address. Olivia's cheeks flushed pink, and she ducked her head back to her mending. "I think I would have liked her too," she said softly. That night, Vincent lay awake in his chair long after Olivia had gone to bed, thinking about the future for the first time in years. He'd been content to simply exist, to work his land and live his quiet life. But Olivia's presence had awakened something in him, a longing for connection, for partnership, for someone to share the burden and joy of daily life. The wagon repair was nearly complete. Another day, maybe 2, and it would be ready for travel. The thought of Olivia leaving filled him with an emptiness that took him by surprise. In less than a week, she'd become essential to the rhythm of his days. He looked forward to meals shared in comfortable conversation, to the sound of her humming as she worked, to the way she challenged his assumptions and made him think about things differently. But she was a widow, still wearing her dead husband's ring, still carrying the fresh weight of grief. And she had plans, a cousin waiting for her in Salt Lake City, a new life to build. What right did he have to interfere with that? The answer came to him in the quiet darkness. None. He had no right at all, but that didn't change what he was beginning to feel. The next morning, Vincent was working on the final adjustments to the wagon wheel when he heard horses approaching. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, and saw 3 riders coming up the road to his ranch. He didn't recognize them, but something about the way they sat their horses, the way they looked around as they approached, set his instincts on edge. "Morning," the lead rider called out as they drew near. He was a big man, heavy-set with a thick beard and small, calculating eyes. "Name's Clarence Holt. These are my boys, Marcus and Pete." Vincent nodded politely but didn't move toward them. "Vincent Irving, what can I do for you?" "We're looking for someone," Clarence said, his eyes scanning the property. "A woman traveling alone in a wagon, dark hair, slight build. Would have come through during that storm a few nights back." Every muscle in Vincent's body tensed. "Why are you looking for her?" "She's family," Clarence said, though something in his tone rang false. "My brother's widow. Took off from Denver without a word, and the family's worried about her." A woman alone on the road, well, all sorts of things could happen. Vincent's mind raced. Olivia had mentioned her husband's brother, how he'd forced her off her land. This had to be him, but why would he follow her all this way? "Can't say I've seen anyone matching that description." Clarence's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that? We tracked her wagon to somewhere near here before we lost the trail in the storm." "I'm sure. Like I said, I haven't seen her." One of the other men, Marcus, spoke up. "Mind if we look around, just to be certain?" "I mind plenty," Vincent said, his voice taking on a hard edge. "This is private property, and I've told you what I know. Time for you to move along." Clarence studied him for a long moment, and Vincent could see the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. Finally, the big man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No offense meant, friend. We'll be on our way. But if you do happen to see this woman, you tell her that her family's looking for her, that we just want to make sure she's taken care of proper." "I'll do that," Vincent lied. He watched them ride away, not relaxing until they disappeared from sight. Then he strode quickly back to the house. Olivia was in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread, and she looked up with a smile when he entered. The smile faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" "Your brother-in-law was just here, Clarence Holt. He's looking for you." All the color drained from Olivia's face. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. No, he can't be. Why would he follow me?" "That's what I want to know. What aren't you telling me, Olivia?" She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were filled with fear. Robert had a claim. A mining claim up in the mountains west of Denver. He filed it the year before he died, spent months working it. He thought it might pan out, might give us a real future. But then he got sick, and the claim just sat there. "And Clarence wants it," Vincent finished. "He tried to get Robert to sign it over before he died, said he'd work it and split the profits, but Robert refused. He wanted me to have it, said if anything happened to him, I could sell it and have enough money to start over somewhere safe." She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. "When Clarence bought the farm from me, he insisted I sign papers. I thought it was just for the land, but now I wonder if there was something else in there, something I didn't understand." Vincent felt fury building in his chest. "Where are the papers now?" "They were in the wagon. If they survived the storm, they're with my things in the barn." They searched through Olivia's belongings until they found a leather satchel that had stayed mostly dry. Inside were several documents, and Vincent spread them out on the kitchen table. His reading wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. And there, buried in the middle of what appeared to be a simple land sale agreement, was language that transferred all of Robert Harrison's holdings and claims to Clarence Holt. "Did you read this before you signed it?" Vincent asked, trying to keep the anger out of his voice. Olivia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "He said it was just formality that I needed to sign to make the sale legal. I was so tired, so overwhelmed with everything. I trusted him because he was Robert's brother. I thought family would look out for family. Vincent took her hands in his, feeling how cold they were despite the warmth of the day. Listen to me. He can't force you to go back. You're a grown woman, free to travel where you please. But the claim, if I signed it away, I have nothing. I'm exactly what I thought I was, a widow with no money and no prospects. That's not true. You have skills, you have strength, and you have options. Your cousin in Salt Lake City is still expecting you. And if the papers aren't legal, if he tricked you into signing, there might be ways to fight it. How? I don't have money for lawyers. I don't have anything. The words came out before Vincent could think them through. You have me. If you want, you could stay here. Not forever, not unless you wanted to, but until we figure this out, until you're safe. Olivia looked up at him, her green eyes wide with surprise and something else, something that made Vincent's heart beat faster. Why would you do that? You barely know me. I know enough, he said quietly. I know you're honest and hardworking. I know you've been dealt a rough hand and you're doing your best with it. I know that this ranch has felt more like a home in the past few days than it has in 5 years, and that's because of you. He took a breath, steadying himself. And I know that if Clarence Holt takes you back to Denver, it won't be for your own good. Men like him don't chase women halfway across the territory out of family concern. You really think he'd hurt me? I think he wants something from you, and he'll do whatever it takes to get it. Whether that means hurting you or just pressuring you until you break, I don't know, but I'm not willing to find out. Olivia was quiet for a long moment, and Vincent could see the war happening behind her eyes. Pride versus practicality, independence versus safety, fear versus trust. Finally, she spoke. What would it look like, me staying here, however you want it to look? You could work for room and board, same as we've been doing. I could use the help with the ranch, and God knows the house is better with you in it. When you feel ready, when you feel safe, you could move on to Salt Lake City, or wherever you want to go. No strings, no expectations. People would talk. A widow living with a bachelor, let them talk. Anyone who knows me knows I'm an honorable man. And anyone who doesn't know me, well, their opinion doesn't matter much anyway. Olivia bit her lip, thinking. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, I'll stay, at least for now. But Vincent, I need you to know that I can't promise anything more than that. I'm not ready for anything more than that. I understand, and I'm not asking for more. I'm just asking you to be safe. But even as he said it, Vincent knew it was a lie. He was already falling for this woman, for her strength and vulnerability, for the way she laughed at his awkward jokes and the way she hummed while she worked. He was falling, and he knew it was dangerous, knew she might never feel the same way. But he couldn't seem to stop himself. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a new normal. Vincent finished repairing Olivia's wagon and stored it in his barn, her horses integrated with his small herd. She took over most of the household duties while also helping him with the outdoor work, proving herself capable with everything from mending fence to treating a lame horse. They talked, endlessly it seemed, about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood dreams of becoming a teacher, about the books she'd loved and the places she'd wanted to see. He shared stories from his years on cattle drives, about sleeping under stars and the strange beauty of storms rolling across open plains. And slowly, carefully, they began to heal. Vincent watched Olivia's confidence grow as she mastered new skills and found her footing in this new life. The haunted look in her eyes faded, replaced by something brighter. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely. She stopped wearing her wedding ring, though she kept it on a chain around her neck. For his part, Vincent found himself changing too. He became more aware of his surroundings, of the way evening light painted the mountains gold, of the smell of sage after rain. He started caring again about things beyond simple survival. He found himself wanting to build, to improve, to create something lasting. One evening in late October, they sat on the porch watching the sun set, wrapped in blankets against the cooling air. The harvest was done, the animals prepared for winter, the house stocked with provisions. There was a sense of peace in the air, of work completed and rest earned. "I should write to my cousin," Olivia said quietly. "Let her know I'm safe, that I won't be coming to Salt Lake City after all." Vincent's heart jumped, but he kept his voice steady. "After all, I want to stay here, Vincent. If you'll have me, not just for safety, not just until I figure things out. I want to stay because this feels like home in a way nowhere has since my mother died." He turned to look at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Olivia." She met his eyes, and in the fading light he could see everything she was feeling written across her face: fear and hope, uncertainty and determination. "I know it's fast. I know people will say it's too soon after Robert's death, that it's not proper. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just gratitude or friendship. It's more than that, and it has been for weeks now." Vincent reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses that had formed from hard work, the strength in her fingers. "I've been in love with you since the morning after the storm," he admitted. "When I woke up and saw you standing at the window, looking out at the new day like you were gathering the courage to face it. I knew then that I wanted to face every day with you, wanted to be the person who stood beside you no matter what came." "Vincent Irving, are you proposing to me?" "I'm saying I love you, Olivia Harrison. And if you'll have me, if you're ready for that, then yes, I'm asking you to marry me. Not because it's proper or convenient, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too, and yes, I'll marry you. But Vincent, I need you to know that I loved Robert. He was a good man, and he deserved better than the death he got. I know, and I'm not trying to replace him or make you forget him. I'm just asking for a chance to build something new with you, to honor what you've lost by making sure your future is full of love and security." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together as night fell around them, making quiet plans for their future. They decided to marry as soon as possible, partly to quiet any potential gossip, but mostly because neither of them saw any reason to wait. They'd both lost enough time to grief and hardship. They were married 3 weeks later by a circuit preacher who came through the area. The ceremony was simple, held in Vincent's parlor with 2 neighbors as witnesses. Olivia wore a dress she'd made herself from fabric Vincent had bought on a trip to the nearest town. It was dark blue, practical but pretty, and when Vincent saw her in it, he thought she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. As they spoke their vows, Vincent felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He was promising to love and protect this woman, to build a life with her, to be worthy of the trust she was placing in him. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed Olivia gently, reverently, and felt her lean into him with a sigh that spoke of relief and homecoming. This was right. This was what was meant to be. The neighbors stayed for a simple meal, then tactfully departed, leaving the newlyweds alone. There was awkwardness at first, both of them dancing around the reality of what came next. But as the evening wore on, as they talked and laughed and simply existed together in their new reality, the awkwardness faded. That night, when they finally went to bed together for the first time, there was tenderness and care in every touch. Vincent was gentle with Olivia, knowing this was difficult for her, that it meant letting go of one life and fully embracing another. And Olivia surprised him with her openness, her willingness to be vulnerable, to trust him with not just her body but her heart. Afterwards, lying together in the darkness, Olivia traced patterns on Vincent's chest with her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me a reason to believe in the future again. For showing me that endings can also be beginnings." Vincent pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You did the same for me. I was just existing before you came. Now I'm living." Winter came hard that year, with snow piling up until it reached the windows and winds that howled like wolves around the eaves. But inside the ranch house, there was warmth and light and laughter. Vincent and Olivia worked together to care for the animals, to keep the house running, to simply survive the harsh season. They learned each other's rhythms and quirks, the small habits and preferences that make up a shared life. Vincent discovered that Olivia sang to herself when she thought no one was listening, old hymns and folk songs in a sweet, clear voice. Olivia learned that Vincent had a talent for whittling and would sit by the fire in the evenings creating small wooden figures with surprising delicacy. They talked about the future, making plans for the spring. Vincent wanted to expand the herd, maybe add some cattle to supplement the horses. Olivia wanted to start a garden, to plant vegetables and maybe some flowers to brighten up the yard. They dreamed together of building something lasting, a legacy to pass down. In February, Olivia realized she was pregnant. She told Vincent one morning at breakfast, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and joy. He stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair, crossing to her and gathering her into his arms. "Are you sure?" he asked. "As sure as I can be. I've had the signs." Vincent felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears. A child. Their child. A new life growing from the love they'd found in the midst of loss and hardship. "This is the best news you could have given me." But Olivia pulled back, her expression troubled. "Vincent, I'm scared. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't do this?" He cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with all the love and certainty he felt. "You're the strongest person I know. You've survived things that would have broken other people. You can do this, and you won't be doing it alone. I'll be right here every step of the way. Promise me." "I promise. Whatever comes, we face it together." The pregnancy progressed through the spring and into summer. As Olivia's belly grew, so did the garden she'd planted. Vincent found himself constantly amazed by the changes happening all around him. His wife blooming with new life, the land producing food from the seeds they'd planted, the ranch slowly expanding as he added to the herd and made improvements to the buildings. In late August, as the heat of summer began to give way to the first hints of autumn, Olivia went into labor. Vincent rode hard to fetch the nearest midwife, a sturdy woman named Mrs. Patterson who delivered half the babies in the territory. She took one look at Olivia and shooed Vincent out of the bedroom. "Go boil water and stay out of my way," she ordered. "This is women's work." The next 12 hours were the longest of Vincent's life. He paced, he prayed, he cursed himself for ever touching Olivia and putting her through this. Every cry of pain that came from the bedroom felt like a knife to his heart. But finally, as the sun was beginning to rise on a new day, he heard a different sound. The thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. Mrs. Patterson emerged a few minutes later, wiping her hands on her apron and smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Irving. You have a son." A big, healthy boy with a good set of lungs on him. Vincent almost fell over with relief. "And Olivia, is she all right?" "She's tired but fine. Lost a fair bit of blood but nothing unusual. She's a strong one, that wife of yours. You can go in and see them now." Vincent entered the bedroom on shaky legs. Olivia was propped up against the pillows, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when he entered, her eyes shining with tears and joy. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Vincent approached slowly, almost reverently. When he looked down at the baby's face, red and wrinkled and perfect, he felt something in his chest crack open. This was his child, his son. A piece of him and Olivia, living and breathing and completely dependent on them. "He's beautiful," Vincent whispered, afraid to speak too loudly and disturb the baby. "He has your nose," Olivia said, laughing weakly. "Poor thing." Vincent sat carefully on the edge of the bed, unable to take his eyes off the baby. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names over the past months but had never quite decided. Now, looking at their son, Olivia said, "I was thinking about my father. His name was James Owen Harrison." "James Owen Irving," Vincent said, testing it out. "I like it, Jamie for short." "Jamie," Olivia repeated, smiling down at the baby. "Welcome to the world, little Jamie. You're already so loved." The first months of Jamie's life were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. Every cough, every cry sent Olivia into a panic. Vincent learned to swaddle and burp and change diapers, skills he'd never imagined needing. But slowly, as Jamie grew and thrived, they relaxed into their new roles as parents. Vincent found himself changed by fatherhood in ways he hadn't expected. He became more cautious, more thoughtful about the future. He started thinking about things like schooling and inheritance, about building a ranch that could support not just him and Olivia, but their children and maybe, someday, their children's children. One evening in late autumn, when Jamie was 3 months old and sleeping peacefully in the cradle Vincent had built, there was a knock at the door. Vincent opened it to find a young man in a suit standing on the porch, a leather satchel in his hand. "Mr. Irving, Vincent Irving, that's me." "What can I do for you?" "My name is Thomas Waverly. I'm an attorney from Denver. I've been looking for Mrs. Olivia Irving, formerly Harrison. I was told she might be here." Vincent tensed immediately, thinking of Clarence Holt. "What's this about? May I come in?" "It's a matter that concerns her late husband's estate." Olivia had come to stand behind Vincent, Jamie in her arms. "I'm Olivia Irving. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of my husband." Thomas nodded and entered when Vincent stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table and pulled papers from his satchel. "Mrs. Irving, I've been retained by the territorial court to investigate certain irregularities in the settlement of Robert Harrison's estate. Specifically, concerning a mining claim that was allegedly transferred to his brother Clarence Holt." Olivia sank into a chair, her face pale. "I signed papers. Clarence said it was for the land sale." "Yes, I've seen those papers. The problem is that they contain fraudulent language. The claim transfer was added after you signed the initial agreement. We know this because the ink is different. The handwriting doesn't match the rest of the document, and several witnesses have come forward stating that Clarence admitted to altering the papers." Vincent felt relief and anger war in his chest. "So the claim is still Olivia's, according to the law, yes. Furthermore, that claim has recently proven to be quite valuable. A mining operation that purchased adjacent land discovered a significant silver vein that runs directly through Mrs. Irving's claim. They've been trying to buy the rights from Clarence Holt, but their surveyor noticed the discrepancies in the paperwork and reported it to the authorities." Olivia looked stunned. "How valuable are we talking about?" Thomas pulled out another paper. "The mining company is offering $50,000 for the rights to work the claim, with an additional percentage of any silver extracted. It's a substantial sum, Mrs. Irving. $50,000. It was more money than Vincent had seen in his entire life." He looked at Olivia and saw his own shock reflected in her eyes. "What happened to Clarence?" he asked. "He's been charged with fraud and is currently awaiting trial in Denver. When he's convicted, and he will be convicted given the evidence, he'll likely spend several years in prison." Olivia was quiet for a long moment, staring down at Jamie's sleeping face. Then she looked up at Thomas. "What do I need to do?" "Sign the sale agreement with the mining company, and the money will be transferred to an account in your name. I can handle all the details if you'd like. There will be legal fees, of course, but they're minimal compared to the amount you'll receive." Vincent watched his wife's face as she processed this information. A year ago, she'd been a penniless widow fleeing across the territory with nothing but a broken wagon and ruined belongings. Now she was a wealthy woman with options and opportunities she'd never dreamed of. "Olivia," he said quietly, drawing her attention, "this is your money, your claim. Whatever you decide to do with it, I'll support you." She reached out and took his hand. "It's our money, Vincent. Yours and mine and Jamie's. We're a family. But it came from Robert. It's his legacy to you." "No," Olivia said firmly. "Robert's legacy to me was the strength to keep going when everything fell apart. This money, it's just money. What matters is what we do with it." They talked long into the night after Thomas left, the papers signed and the wheels of legal process set in motion. $50,000 could change their lives completely. They could buy more land, build a bigger house, hire help. They could travel, see the places Olivia had always dreamed of. They could ensure Jamie's education, give him opportunities neither of them had had. But in the end, they decided to stay largely as they were. They would expand the ranch moderately, add some cattle and improve the buildings. They would put money aside for Jamie's future and for any other children they might have. The rest they would save, a cushion against hard times, a security they'd both learned not to take for granted. "I don't want our lives to change too much," Olivia said as they lay in bed that night, Jamie asleep in his cradle beside them. "I like what we have. I like the work, the simplicity, the sense that we're building something with our own hands." Vincent kissed her forehead. "I feel the same way. Money is good to have, but it's not what makes life worth living. You and Jamie, this ranch, the life we're building together, that's what matters. You're a good man, Vincent Irving. And you're an amazing woman, Olivia Irving. I fall more in love with you every day." She turned in his arms, kissing him with a passion that still surprised him sometimes, even after a year of marriage. "Show me," she whispered against his lips. And he did, with tenderness and heat and the deep certainty that this was where he was meant to be. The years that followed were good ones. Jamie grew into a bright, curious boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's steady temperament. 2 years after his birth, Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Vincent's mother. She had Vincent's dark hair and Olivia's delicate features, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. The ranch prospered under Vincent's careful management. He hired 2 ranch hands to help with the growing herd, good men who became almost like family. Olivia's garden expanded into a small orchard, and she began selling preserves and pies to the growing settlement that had sprung up about 10 miles from their property. They became pillars of the small community, known for their generosity and hard work. When a neighbor's barn burned down, Vincent organized a barn raising. When a widow needed help with her harvest, Olivia rallied the other women to assist. They gave to the church, helped fund a school, and opened their home to travelers who needed a place to stay. But through it all, they never forgot where they'd started. On the anniversary of the storm that had brought them together, they would sit on the porch in the evening and remember. Remember the fear and uncertainty, the desperate hope, the unlikely love that had bloomed in the midst of chaos. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I'd ridden past your wagon that night?" Vincent asked one year, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "You wouldn't have," Olivia said confidently. It's not in your nature to pass by someone in need. Maybe, but what if I had? What if the timing had been different or the storm had taken you somewhere else? Olivia took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Then I suppose we both would have missed out on the best thing that ever happened to us. But it didn't happen that way. You found me, you saved me, and by morning I was part of your life. And every morning since, I've woken up grateful for that storm, for the broken wheel, for every circumstance that brought me to you. Vincent pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid reality of her presence. I love you, Olivia Irving. More than I knew it was possible to love another person. I love you too, Vincent, forever and always. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard. Jamie was teaching Rose how to whistle, both of them laughing when she couldn't quite get it. The sound of their joy filled the air, mixing with the evening songs of birds and the distant lowing of cattle. This was happiness, Vincent thought. Not the absence of hardship or struggle, but the presence of love and purpose and connection. They'd both traveled through darkness to get here, had lost and grieved and suffered. But those experiences had shaped them, had prepared them to appreciate and nurture the light when they finally found it. As the years continued to pass, Jamie and Rose grew. Jamie showed an early aptitude for working with horses, spending hours in the barn with his father, learning to train and care for the animals. Rose was more interested in books and learning, devouring every volume in their growing library and begging her mother to teach her to read before she was even old enough for school. When Jamie was 10 and Rose was 8, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and there were days when she was so sick she could barely leave bed. Vincent worried constantly, remembering stories of women who died in childbirth or from complications. But Olivia remained calm, trusting her body and the experienced midwife who delivered Rose. In the spring of 1886, Olivia gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Samuel and Benjamin. The birth was long and difficult, and for a few terrifying hours, Vincent thought he might lose her. But Olivia proved once again that she was stronger than she looked, pulling through and recovering slowly over the following weeks. With 4 children now, the ranch house felt full to bursting with life and noise and love. Vincent hired a young woman from town to help Olivia with the housework and the babies, giving her time to rest and recover. Mrs. Patterson, the midwife, told Olivia firmly that 4 was probably enough, that another pregnancy could be dangerous at her age. Olivia was 33 now, Vincent 35. They were no longer the desperate, grieving people who'd found each other in a storm. They'd built a life together, raised children, created something lasting and good. And while they were no longer young, they were still deeply in love, still finding joy in each other's company. One evening, when the twins were 6 months old and finally sleeping through the night, Vincent and Olivia found themselves alone together for the first time in what felt like months. The older children were spending the night at a neighbor's house, and the twins were asleep. The house was blissfully quiet. I'd forgotten what silence sounded like, Olivia said, curling up against Vincent on the sofa they'd bought a few years earlier. It's nice, Vincent agreed, his arm around her shoulders. Though I have to admit, I'll probably spend the whole evening listening for crying. Olivia laughed softly. We've become those people, the ones who can't relax even when they have the chance. It's your fault for making me fall in love with you. If I'd stayed a bachelor, I could relax all I wanted. Liar. You were the loneliest man I'd ever met when we first met. You just didn't know it. Vincent considered this. You're right, I was lonely. I'd convinced myself I was fine on my own, but I was just surviving, not living. You taught me the difference. Olivia tilted her head up to look at him. Even after 11 years of marriage, the sight of her still made his heart skip. There were lines around her eyes now, threads of silver in her dark hair, but she was more beautiful to him than ever. "We taught each other," she said. "I was so lost when you found me, Vincent, not just physically, but in every way. I'd given up on the idea of happiness, of having a future worth looking forward to. You gave that back to me." "We gave it to each other," Vincent corrected, kissing her gently. "That's what love is, isn't it? Two people helping each other become more than they could be alone." They sat together in the quiet evening, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't always been easy. There had been difficult times, arguments and misunderstandings, moments when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But through it all, they'd held onto each other, remembering the commitment they'd made. As the children grew older, the ranch continued to thrive. Vincent's careful breeding program had resulted in horses that were in high demand throughout the territory. Buyers came from as far as California to purchase his stock. Olivia's preserves and baked goods had become so popular that she'd opened a small shop in town, run by a young woman she'd trained. Jamie, at 16, was already as tall as his father and taking on more responsibility around the ranch. He had a gift for understanding horses, a natural empathy that made him an excellent trainer. Rose, at 14, had won a scholarship to a boarding school in Salt Lake City, where she could get the education she craved. The twins, now 6, were wild and adventurous, always getting into some scrape or another. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Jamie announced that he'd been offered an apprenticeship with a renowned horse trainer in Colorado. It was an incredible opportunity, one that would take him away for at least a year but could establish his reputation and career. Vincent's first instinct was to say no, to keep his son close and safe. But he looked at Olivia and saw understanding in her eyes. This was what parenting meant, letting go even when it hurt, trusting that you'd given your children the tools they needed to make their own way. "When would you leave?" Vincent asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Spring," Jamie said, watching his father anxiously. "I know it's far and you need help here, but this could be my chance to really learn to become the best I can be." "Then you should go," Vincent said, and saw relief flood his son's face. "We'll manage here. Your mother and I didn't raise you to play it safe. We raised you to grab opportunities when they come." After dinner, when the children had scattered to their various activities, Olivia found Vincent in the barn, ostensibly checking on the horses but really just needing a moment to process. She came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Our baby is almost grown," she said softly. "I know. When did that happen? I swear he was just learning to walk yesterday. Time moves faster than we think." Before we know it, Rose will be off to college, the twins will be getting into trouble with girls, and we'll be sitting in our rocking chairs wondering where it all went. Vincent pulled her close. "As long as I'm sitting in my rocking chair next to yours, I'll be happy. We did good, didn't we? With them, with this life, we did great. They're good kids, all of them, smart and kind and capable. That's all because of you." "Because of us," Olivia corrected. "We're a team, remember?" The years continued their relentless march forward. Jamie left for his apprenticeship and returned a year later, more confident and skilled than ever. He took over more and more of the ranch's horse operations, allowing Vincent to slow down a bit. Rose graduated from her boarding school and decided to become a teacher, taking a position at the school in town. The twins grew into young men with their own personalities and dreams, Sam wanting to study law and Ben determined to explore the West before settling down. Vincent and Olivia found themselves entering a new phase of life. They were grandparents now, Jamie having married a sweet young woman named Clara and started a family of his own. Rose was courting a young lawyer, much to her delight. The twins were off pursuing their respective paths. On a warm evening in the summer of 1902, Vincent and Olivia celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. Friends and family came from all over the territory to celebrate with them. As Vincent looked around at the gathered crowd, at the children and grandchildren, at the ranch he'd built and the community they'd helped shape, he felt overwhelming gratitude. Later, when the guests had gone and they were alone together, Olivia led him out to the porch where they'd spent so many evenings over the years. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was soft with the promise of summer. 25 years, Olivia said, leaning against the porch rail. Can you believe it? Barely. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you in that storm. Other times it feels like you've been part of my life forever. By morning I was part of your life, Olivia said, echoing the words they'd spoken to each other so many times over the years. And I've been part of it ever since. The best part, I hope. The essential part, Vincent corrected, coming to stand beside her. There's no me without you, Olivia, not anymore. You're woven into every part of who I am. She turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I never thought I'd be this happy. After Robert died, after I lost everything, I thought my life was over. I thought the best I could hope for was to survive, to get through each day. But you showed me that life could begin again, that love could be found in the most unexpected places. Vincent cupped her face in his hands, looking into the eyes that still made his heart race after all these years. You were always worth finding, Olivia Irving. I'd ride through 1,000 storms to find you again. You old romantic, she teased, but her voice was thick with emotion. I learned from the best. They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of the certainty that came from decades of love and partnership. Around them, the ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms. In the barn, horses shuffled in their stalls. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of sage and pine. This was home. This was family. This was the life they'd built together from nothing but determination and love. As they stood together under the stars, Vincent thought about that storm, about the broken wagon and the frightened woman he'd found. He thought about the leap of faith it had taken for both of them to open their hearts again, to trust in the possibility of happiness after loss. If he could go back and tell his younger self anything, it would be this: the storm was worth it. The fear and uncertainty, the risk of loving and potentially losing again, it was all worth it for the life waiting on the other side. Years continued to pass, bringing changes as they always did. Vincent's hair turned completely gray, then white. Olivia's hands developed arthritis, making it harder to do the fine sewing she'd once loved. But they adapted, found new ways to contribute, took joy in watching their children and grandchildren thrive. Vincent eventually turned over the main operations of the ranch to Jamie, who ran it with the same care and dedication his father had shown. Rose's husband became a judge, and she continued teaching, touching the lives of countless children. Sam did indeed become a lawyer, practicing in Salt Lake City, while Ben traveled the West before finally settling down with a wife and starting a small ranch of his own in Montana. On a quiet evening in the spring of 1910, Vincent and Olivia sat together on their porch, now well into their 60s. They'd lived to see automobiles and telephones, had watched the world change in ways they'd never imagined when they were young. But some things remained constant: their love for each other, the beauty of the land, the importance of family. You have any regrets? Olivia asked, her hand in his as it had been for 35 years. Vincent considered the question carefully. I regret that we didn't have more time. I regret every moment I wasted before I found you, every day I spent alone when I could have been looking for you. We had the time we were meant to have, Olivia said gently, and we filled it with love and purpose. That's more than most people get. I suppose you're right. What about you? Any regrets? Only that I didn't trust myself sooner. That I let fear and grief hold me back from reaching for happiness. But you were patient with me, gave me the time I needed. That's one of the things I've always loved most about you, Vincent. Your patience and kindness. You make it easy to be patient. You're worth waiting for. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, they sat in comfortable silence. They didn't need words anymore, not really. After so many years together, they could communicate with a look, a touch, a shared breath. Vincent thought about the young man he'd been, alone in this house, convinced he didn't need anyone. He thought about Olivia, desperate and afraid in that storm, thinking her life was over. And he thought about the miracle of two broken people finding each other and creating something whole and beautiful together. That night, as they lay in bed together, Olivia in the circle of Vincent's arms as she'd been for thousands of nights before, she said softly, "Thank you for finding me." "Thank you for letting me," Vincent replied, kissing her forehead. "Promise me something, Vincent, anything. Promise me that if I go first, you'll keep living. Really living, not just existing. You'll spend time with the children, enjoy the grandchildren, take joy in the life we built together." "Olivia, promise me," she insisted, her voice firm despite the tears he could hear in it. "I promise. But only if you promise me the same thing. I promise. Though I can't imagine this life without you in it. Then we'll just have to make sure we have many more years together. Deal, deal." They did have more years, blessed years filled with the kind of quiet contentment that comes from a life well lived. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, their 50th. They became great-grandparents, holding tiny new lives and marveling at the continuation of the family they'd started. Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1920, with Olivia beside him and his children gathered around. He was 71 years old and had lived to see the ranch become one of the most successful in the territory, to see his children and grandchildren thriving, to know that the legacy he and Olivia had built would continue long after they were gone. Olivia mourned him deeply, but kept her promise. She lived on for another 5 years, spending her time with family, sharing stories of the life she and Vincent had built together. She made sure the grandchildren knew their grandfather, knew the values he'd lived by and the love he'd had for all of them. When she finally passed in the spring of 1925, at the age of 72, it was with a smile on her face and Vincent's name on her lips. The family buried her next to him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they'd loved and the family they'd created together. On Olivia's headstone, beneath her name and dates, her children had inscribed, "She was found in a storm and became the light of his life." Together they built a legacy of love, and it was true. What had started with a desperate rescue on a storm-torn night had blossomed into something extraordinary. A love that had weathered every challenge, produced a family that would carry on their values for generations, and created a home that stood as a testament to what two people could build when they committed to facing life together. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the Irving family. Each generation added their own touches but maintained the core values Vincent and Olivia had established: hard work, integrity, generosity, and above all, love. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original cabin was preserved, a reminder of where it all began. Years later, when great-great-grandchildren asked about Vincent and Olivia, the stories were told with reverence and joy. The story of the storm, of a man who couldn't pass by someone in need, of a woman who had the courage to start over, of two broken hearts that healed each other. It became a family legend, the foundation story of the Irving family. And in a way, Vincent and Olivia lived on. In the values their descendants carried forward, in the ranch that still bore their mark, in the community they'd helped build. But most of all, they lived on in the proof that love, real and deep and committed, could transform lives and create something lasting. The storm that had brought them together had long since passed, but what they'd built in its aftermath endured. A testimony to the truth that sometimes our darkest moments lead us to our greatest blessings, that endings can be beginnings, and that love found in the most unexpected places can be the most enduring of all. Their story became a reminder to future generations that life is unpredictable, that tragedy can strike without warning, but that hope and love and human connection can see us through even the darkest times. That sometimes the person we need most shows up exactly when we need them, in the middle of a storm, offering not just rescue but the possibility of a whole new life. And so the story of Vincent Irving and Olivia Harrison, of a cowboy and a widow who found each other in the chaos of a Utah storm in 1875, lived on. A love story for the ages, proof that even in the hardest times, in the wildest places, love could bloom and flourish and create something beautiful that would last for generations to come.